Hey everybody, Mrs. Bianchi. Use the dot plot to answer questions 3 through 5. The dot plot shows the number of cats that were adopted each day in an animal shelter. How many cats were adopted in all? So just to make sure we understand what this is really showing, when we say one what, right? See how there's dots here? This represents that value. So we have two occurrences of one cat being adopted. We have one, two, three, four occurrences of two cats being adopted, and so on. So in order to figure out how many cats were adopted at all, sometimes it's helpful to just stop and start writing out the values, right? So this is one occurrence of 0. This is occurrence of 1, another occurrence of 1, and then we have four occurrences of the 2. So I'm just going to write it out just so your brain can process this for a moment. And this is three occurrences of a 3. So if I write that out as 3 3s, and then we have three occurrences of 4 cats, and 2 occurrences of 5 cats. So if this is one cat adopted and they want to know how many cats were adopted at all, the mistake that a lot of sixth graders make is they think that you just count the dots and they pick that as their answer. But really, we have to add up all of these numbers. So if I add up all of these numbers, that'll give me a much bigger number than what people would originally think. So a better strategy is to just take, like, obviously this is 0 cats, right? But what's the sum of this? Wouldn't that be 2? So I'm going to put a 2 above here, and you're going to start to see a pattern. What's the sum of all this? 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. Isn't that the same thing as 2 times 4, or 8? And by the way, maybe I better put a 0 above this. What's the sum of all these numbers? 3 plus 3 plus 3. Isn't that the same thing as 3 times 3, which would be 9? And what's the sum of all these numbers? It would be the same thing as taking 4 plus 4 plus 4 is the same thing as multiplying 4 times 3, which would be 12. And then the sum of these two numbers would obviously be 10. So if you add up all these numbers, you will get the number of cats that were adopted. Now, one of the things that I want to remind you about is, what does this really mean you can do? You don't have to write out all the numbers like I did here. The shortcut is to just take the number that you have here and multiply it by how many dots there are to get how many. Take the number here, multiply it by how many dots. 2 times 4 dots is 8. 3 times 3 dots is 9. 4 times 3 dots is 12, and so on. So next time you approach one of these questions, that'll be your method, and I'll see something like this on your piece of paper. All right, so now let's talk about the median, because that's a little trickier. The median. Now, what is the median? It's one of the measures of center, or what sometimes we call central tendency. And the median is the middle number in an ordered data set. Now, I do have all the numbers written out. In fact, let me move this out of the way, because I'm going to show you how you might approach this if you actually list out the numbers. If you listed out the numbers, the first thing that's important is to know how many you have. And if I count how many numbers I have, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 data points here. Now that should also match how many dots I have on the dot plot. Now, the midway point, you would want to say to yourself, if we have 15 data points, what is that number? What's the halfway point? We divide that by 2 to get the halfway point. So 2 goes into this how many times? Well, wouldn't it be 7? And if I subtract, I get the 1 left over. Bring this down. And I ran out of room, but you can see that this would go in 7.5 times. The median would be 7.5, right? Or the middle would be, I'm sorry, there's 7.5 data points that we have to count in. So if we count in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on that side, and we count in on the low end 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on that side, then that puts this number in the middle. Now, how can we use that same strategy of finding the midpoint, because 7 and 5/10 would be the midpoint. That means count in 7 and 5/10 data points in. If you didn't want to list out the numbers, what's your approach? You would still use this number, but you do this. Watch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then, the halfway point. Count in from the low end. 1, 2, or I'm sorry, the high end I meant to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this would be the 7.5 mark, would be this dot right here. What is that number? We would still get 3. Now, when you have a lot of values, you wouldn't want to write all the values out. We only had 15 data points. But what if we had 63 data points? Would you really want to list all those out in order from least to greatest? Probably not. So understanding how to use the strategy of find the midpoint, count in from the low end, count in from the high end, and find that number or numbers in the middle. Now, as it turns out, 15 is an odd number. If this had been an even number, then you would have two numbers in the middle. And if that's true, then you want to add those two numbers in the middle and divide by 2 to get basically the average or the mean of those two numbers. All right, so what's the answer to number 4? What's the median number of cats adopted in a day? Hopefully you see what it is in my image here. We're going to go with 3 on that. Number 5, let's look at the question there. Which statement is true? There are no outliers in the data. Any outliers? Doesn't appear to be. B, there are gaps in the data. I don't see any holes here. There is no mode. Now it looks like the number that occurs most often is this number, right? We have most occurrences of that. The data clusters from 1 cat to 5 cats. Is that true? So which one is the most true? So remember, a cluster is where most of the data is. All right, so hopefully you found this video helpful. Good luck with the rest of it.